Hello everyone, I am Banu, Assistant Professor of English, Ms.A.K.Remi College, Tiruchirappalli, Tamil Nadu. I am here to give a lecture on Introduction to Literary Criticism and Theories. My presentation focuses on what is literary criticism, types of literary criticism, the critical method, approach of a critic, what is literary theory, and major trends in literary theory. So, what is literary criticism? Criticism is the branch of study concerned with defining, classifying, expounding, and evaluating works of literature. Literary criticism involves close reading of a literary work. It is the method used for interpreting texts and developing arguments with enough evidence to support the claim made by the critic. It is the evaluation of literary work, including the classification by genre, analysis of structure, and judgment of value. Oxford Dictionary gives the definition of literary criticism as the art or practice of judging and commenting on the qualities and character of literary works. Literary criticism can be further divided into theoretical criticism and practical criticism. Theoretical criticism is a critical approach or doctrine that examines a literary work in the light of certain theories of literature or uses the text as a support for the development of literary theory. Aristotle's Poetics is a good example for theoretical criticism. Practical criticism concerns itself with the discussion of particular works and writers. In practical criticism, the theoretical principles which control the mode of the analysis, interpretation, and evaluation of a work are often left implicit or brought in only as the occasion demands. Dr. Johnson's Lives of the Most Eminent English Poets, Matthew Arnold's Essays in Criticism, T.S. Eliot's Selected Essays are some of the examples of practical criticism. Coleridge's chapters on the poetry of Wordsworth in Biographia Literaria and his lectures on Shakespeare fall under practical criticism. The term practical criticism came into light in 1920s with a series of experiments by the Cambridge critic I.A. Richards. What he did is he gave a set of poems to his students for interpretation without giving any information about the poet, its title, or when they were written. The objective of his experiment was to encourage students to concentrate on the words on the page rather than relying on preconceived or received beliefs about the text. Practical criticism is a form of literary analysis which focuses exclusively on the text, ignoring such extraneous factors as authorial intention and historical context. I.A. Richards' Principles of Literary Criticism, which was published in the year 1924, and Northrop Frye's Anatomy of Criticism, which was published in 1957, throw much light on practical criticism. Practical criticism can be further classified into impressionistic criticism and judicial criticism. Impressionistic criticism attempts to represent in word the felt qualities of a particular passage or work and to express the response that the work directly evokes from the critic as an individual. Impressionistic criticism means personal impression. It emphasizes how the work of art affects the critic. Impressionistic criticism is always subjective. Judicial criticism is a type of practical criticism that regards judgment as the goal of literary criticism and aims to assess literary works in accordance with a set of external principles and rules that are viewed as objective and unchanging. Now, let us see some of the basic approaches to literary interpretation. Mimetic theory. The word mimesis is derived from the ancient Greek word meaning imitation or representation. It describes the process of imitation or mimicry through which artists portray and interpret the world. Mimetic theories judge a literary work of art in terms of imitation or reflection or representation of human life. This is the earliest way of judging any work of art in relation to reality, whether the representation is accurate or not. The next one is pragmatic theory, which emphasizes the reader's relation to the work. The work is treated as something that is constructed to achieve certain effects on the audience. Effects may be for the aesthetic pleasure, instruction, or any kind of emotion. Towards the end of 19th century, pragmatism became the most vital school of thought. Expressive theory in criticism focuses on the author's emotion. It describes poetry as an expression, as an overflow of a poet's feelings. One of the greatest writers associated with expressive approach is William Wordsworth. Objective theory in criticism is constructive response based on balanced thoughts and facts rather than emotion and personal preference. Objective study of literature appreciates the work of art in isolation from external points of reference. Let us now move on to literary theories. What is literary theory? Literary theory refers to any principles from internal analysis of literary texts or from knowledge external to the text that can be applied in multiple interpretive situations. A basic way of explaining literary theory is that these ideas act as different lenses critics use to view and talk about art, literature, and even culture. These different lenses allow critics to consider works of art based on certain assumptions within that school of theory. The different lenses also allow critics to focus on particular aspects of a work they consider important. The major trends in literary theory are traditional literary criticism, new criticism, structuralism, modernism, postmodernism, deconstruction and post-structuralism, feminism, and psychoanalysis. Let us learn about traditional literary criticism and new criticism in detail in this session. In traditional criticism, the critics examine how the author's life and his biographical information is reflected in the work. The traditional approach is the type of criticism which dominated the study of literature until the 1930s and is employed in some classrooms even today. In this approach, the work of art appeared to be of secondary importance, something that merely illustrated in the background. Such an approach leads to the study of literature as essentially a biography or history. Traditional approach in literary criticism can be further classified into historical biographical approach and moral philosophical approach. In order to do a biographical reading of a piece of literature, we need to research the author's life and look for ways in which his or her life is reflected in the work. In order to do a historical reading, we should research the time period of the setting of the novel and then determine what the story reveals about its time and place in history. To do a historical biographical reading, we must research the personal life and the historical time period of the author. The biographical historical approach works better for some authors than others. For example, the works of Charles Dickens are considered to reflect very strongly the time period in which he was writing, and several of the novels reflect Dickens' own experiences as a child and young adult. In moral philosophical approach, critics believe that the purpose of writing is not just to tell a story. A text is considered good if it leads us to understand our inner emotions. This approach works for texts that have an obvious moral philosophy like Alexander Pope's An Essay on Man. New criticism. New criticism is a school of Anglo-American literary critical theory that was influential from the late 1920s and prominent until the late 1960s, whose founding father were two colossal figures of the critical world, T.S. Eliot and I.A. Richards. In analyzing and evaluating a work, the new critics usually do not refer to the author's biography, contemporary social conditions, and its psychological or moral effects on the reader. They are mainly concerned with the study of words and the structure of poetry. The distinctive procedure of new criticism is explication or close reading, the close and subtle analysis of the work. Here is a quick wrap-up of today's presentation. Literary criticism, theoretical and practical criticism, practical criticism and its classifications, basic approaches to literary interpretation, literary theory, trends in literary theory, traditional literary criticism, and new criticism. Hope this would have helped you. Thank you.